and welcome to the Building Your Sakai Implementation Checklist webinar. This is Kara Stiles of Brutus Partners, and I see that a couple of you are still kind of getting yourself logged into the webinar application, so I'm going to give everyone just another minute or so to do that. We have participants here from all over the world, so I would especially like to welcome those of you who are up in the middle of the night or your very early morning to attend. I really appreciate that. Today we are going to spend some time talking about building your Sakai implementation checklist. So what I am going to do now is share my computer screen, and I'm going to toggle over to the first page of the Sakai checklist presentation. So give me just a second to do that. And before I actually start, I do, as I said before, want to give everyone some time to get themselves settled in, but I also would like to make sure that you guys are able to see my computer screen. And the way that I'm going to check that, since you're all muted and can't actually talk to me at this point, is what I'd like everyone to do is raise your hand using the little raise your hand icon that you see in the GoToWebinar console. So if you see the little hand icon, if you can hear me, go ahead and raise your hand and let me know that you're able to hear me and also see my computer screen. Okay, it looks like most of you are able to hear me and see my computer screen, which is great. So I think that means we are going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, and we will get started. Just a couple of webinar tips. I know that everyone can see my computer screen at this point. If you have a question throughout the webinar that you would like to ask, I know I just said before that everyone is muted. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, what you should do is type that question into the questions queue that you have available on your GoToWebinar console, and then I'm going to be checking periodically to see if there are any questions throughout the presentation. And if there are, and I see those questions in the question queue, I'll be sure to answer those. So I see another few folks are coming in, so welcome everybody. And as I said before, especially a warm welcome to those of you who are up in the middle of the night. We've got folks here from all over the world, so welcome everybody. I'm glad you came. So here on my computer screen right now is the agenda, and we're actually going to spend just a little bit of time covering these first 4 bullet points, and we're going to spend the bulk of the presentation today talking about that 5th bullet point, which is building your Sakai implementation checklist. But before I do that, I'm just going to check. A bunch of folks just came in while I was talking, so I want to make sure that everyone who just joined is able to see my computer screen and is able to hear me. So if you would please, if you're able to hear me and see my computer screen, click on the little raise your hand icon that's in the GoToWebinar control panel console. If you could just click on that raise your hand button. I see some hands going up, which is great news. Okay, it sounds like everybody is still able to see and hear, so that's fantastic. All right, well, you guys can see the agenda. I'll leave that on for just another second or so, and then we'll move on to the Who is Brutus Partners slide. I'm Brutus Partners. I'm Kara Stiles. I'm the president and principal consultant of Brutus Partners, and we're based in Madison, Wisconsin in the United States. And listed on the computer screen right now is sort of a short list of some of the types of services that we offer. I have been working with Sakai since 2006, and I've helped more than 45 organizations. Most of them have been colleges and universities, but some of those organizations have been K-12 institutions as well as private corporations go live on Sakai. So I know a little bit about Sakai, and I learn a little bit more every day because I do spend quite a bit of time doing configuration consulting as well as Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 3 support for Sakai. So here's just a little bit of information about Sakai. Sakai is used by more than 250 institutions worldwide. It is open source, and that means that the source code is freely available for anyone to use, download, modify, and so that's kind of a benefit for those of you who have developers on staff and really like to create custom implementations of Sakai. An open source product gives you the opportunity to do that. Sakai is also a very configurable environment. For example, on the technical side, there are greater than 500 different property settings that you can turn on and off. And that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of Sakai's configurability. So my point is that no two Sakai implementations look the same. Everyone's Sakai implementation looks different depending on how that particular organization has chosen to configure Sakai, customize Sakai if they are indeed going to be doing development work to customize Sakai, and also via integration. So Sakai is integratable, if that's even a word, with various other external systems. And so you can cause Sakai, or your implementation of Sakai, to talk to other systems. And to just kind of illustrate my point in terms of what I said before, that no two Sakai implementations look the same, I'm just going to quickly show you some examples of live Sakai implementations. What we're looking at right now is the University of Michigan's Sakai implementation. They didn't even call their implementation Sakai. It's called C-Tools. And there are some folks in Australia who have named their Sakai implementation Study Space. And the folks at Palo Verde College called their Sakai implementation Bridge. Texas State calls theirs Tracks, and Marist College calls their Sakai implementation iLearn. So you don't even have to call Sakai Sakai. If you don't want to, you can call it whatever you'd like. Back to the presentation. And by the way, I should mention that I will be sending out a PDF of all of these slides, and these slides will have all of the links to the various links that I've shared on the slides, and you'll be able to access those links from the PDF. So let's talk a little bit about Lesson Cloud. Lesson Cloud is something new in the Sakai community. I actually released Lesson Cloud just last year, and in essence, Lesson Cloud is a standalone instance of Sakai that's publicly available, and folks who want to use it can use Lesson Cloud, and they basically just pay for what you use and cancel when you're done. And that's kind of how that works. So the reason behind Lesson Cloud is that last year I was working with the American Diabetes Association on a training program for the staff members at a diabetes camp for children. So if you can imagine having 80 staff members taking care of close to 200 diabetic children, there's probably going to be a little bit of training involved. In the past, we would try to gather all of these staff members in a room together to do training for a full day. And if you can imagine trying to get a bunch of doctors and nurses and paramedics and other medical professionals into a room on the same day is really, really hard because, well, people have jobs and stuff. So what made sense to us then was that we needed to offer the diabetes camp staff training online. And so all we needed was one course, and we needed the course for about 3 months, and we needed to train 80 people. And when we looked into creating a standalone Sakai implementation, all of our options were way too expensive. And so that was what kind of led to the creation of Lesson Cloud by Brutus Partners. We kind of figured, well, there might be some other organizations out there who just need to run a couple of courses, and that doesn't really require an entire, implementation of Sakai. And so that's kind of the history behind Lesson Cloud. It's used for small-scale course hosting, or you can use it for a low-cost pilot or as a low-cost pilot without doing an entire Sakai implementation. So if you are a larger organization or a larger school and you're considering Sakai, you could do a low-cost pilot using Lesson Cloud, and then when you're done, if you decide to continue on with Sakai, you can do your own Sakai implementation after that. You've got two major decisions to make before you can start your Sakai implementation. And the first major decision is somewhat obvious. You have to first choose Sakai as the LMS that you're going to use to run whatever courses or projects you're going to run. So that's the first major decision. And then once you've made that decision, what you next need to decide is how you're going to host Sakai and or how you're going to host your courses. So some institutions, mostly larger institutions or smaller institutions that have a technical team on staff, will choose to host Sakai themselves. That could mean one of two things. You could either host your Sakai implementation on-site, which means you buy computer hardware, like actual computers, or you use computers, physical computers that you already have on site, and you install Sakai on one of those machines, and that's called on-site hosting. Or you could choose to host Sakai in the cloud using something like Amazon Web Services. So if you don't have physical hardware and you still want to host your own implementation of Sakai, you can choose to do that in the cloud. Another option is to have one of the Sakai commercial affiliates host your Sakai implementation. So this is useful for organizations that don't actually have an IT staff on the ground who can get Sakai set up and configured and the database all set up and things like that. There are a bunch of Sakai commercial affiliates out there, and they're of course more than happy to help you with your Sakai hosting needs. And then lastly, as I said before, for the smaller organizations, if you just need to run a couple of courses, you can choose to host Sakai in Lesson Cloud. No matter which option you choose, you're still going to have to do some stuff. You're going to have to do a little bit of work before you can actually go live with your courses or with your Sakai implementation. So here's a little bit of a surprise. There are actually 3 implementation checklists that I'm going to share with you today. And the reason there are 3 is because you have to do different things depending on how you're choosing to host Sakai. So there's a self-hosted implementation checklist, and for those who are self-hosted, and I know some of you on the line right now are planning your own self-hosted implementation, there's a very full checklist with lots of things to do. For those of you who are going to be commercially hosted, and I'm not sure if anyone on the line is going to be commercially hosted, if you are, I just haven't met you yet, there's an abridged version of the self-hosted checklist. And then lastly, if you're going to have your courses hosted in Lesson Cloud, you get to take advantage of the very light version of the checklist. So everyone has work to do, and the amount of work you do depends on how you choose to host your Sakai implementation. And this webinar is not about telling you which of these options is going to be best for you. I think that each option could work well for folks, but I mean, it really just depends on what you need, how many courses you're going to have, and what type of staff you have available to actually manage your Sakai implementation. I am going to stop for just a second and check the question queue to see if there are any questions so far. And it looks like we don't have any questions, which is great. So that means I can move on to the next slide. The Sakai implementation checklists that I'm about to share with you are very loosely based on the 5 project phases as defined by the Project Management Institute. I think researching and looking at these phases is kind of boring, but they made a pretty diagram, so I'm sharing that with you on the screen. But really, the Sakai implementation checklist is sort of a derivation of the checklist that you see on the screen. So really, here are the 5 Sakai implementation checklist phases, or the 5 phases that are part of your Sakai implementation project plan. And if you are, like I said, if you are hosting Sakai on your own, you're going to be doing a little bit more work up front. If you are commercially hosting Sakai, you'll do a little less work. And then if you're hosting your courses in Lesson Cloud, you'll do even less work. So at this point, what I'm going to do is take us to the implementation checklist. And I do want to say I'm so sorry for sharing a spreadsheet on a webinar. That's kind of a big no-no because nobody likes looking at spreadsheets. However, I could not think of a better way to show 3 different checklists at the exact same time on a webinar. And so that's why I am showing you the checklist on a spreadsheet during this webinar. So please accept my apologies for that. So as I mentioned before, there are 5 phases, and so first we're going to take a look at the requirements and planning phase, which in fact sometimes tends to be the phase that requires the most effort and is sometimes revisited throughout the other phases if you realize during your Sakai implementation that maybe you haven't done everything exactly the way you wanted to in the first place. So the requirements and planning phase is really about making decisions about how you are going to set up Sakai ahead of time, and that leads to better outcomes and a higher degree of satisfaction once everything has been implemented, because you don't have to deal with as many, I call them clients, but as many constituent complaints about how things are working. It's especially useful to involve actual users in the requirements and planning phase. Not too many, because then you could have a group of people in a room screaming and crying at each other during the decision-making process. But it is a good idea to have, especially if you're from a school, a couple of faculty representatives or instructional design representatives taking part in that phase. So let's take a look at the actual components of that phase. Let's see if my computer screen, here we go. All right, so I'm going to skip this first one, which says decide to implement Sakai, because, well, of course, that's kind of a given. So I think the first, I should explain this spreadsheet first. So across this header area on the top, we have a column for the task. So there's a list of tasks and task categories here in this first column. And then if any task has subtasks or some type of supplemental tasks, you'll see those in the subtask column. Now here's who gets to do what. There's a column for each type of implementation. So if you're self-hosted, as you can see, there's a lot of X's. So there's a list of things for you to do if you're self-hosted, a modified list of tasks to complete if you're commercially hosted, and an even further modified or light version of a checklist for those of you who are hosting your course in Lesson Cloud. So everyone has to do some work. How you're hosting determines the amount of work you're going to end up doing. So establishing your implementation team at the beginning is important, because you're going to have folks at the end who are going to need to know a lot about Sakai, enough to create things like migration plans and support for users. So it's a good idea to have, oh, and by the way, I know that for some Sakai implementations, one individual can wear many hats. So the instructional designer for your Sakai implementation, meaning that's the actual person who creates and designs the courses, might also be the project manager and the functional administrator for your Sakai implementation. So these you don't have to hire 13 people in order to implement Sakai. A single individual can wear many of these hats. So this is just kind of a list of some of the roles that you're going to need for your Sakai implementation, depending on the type of implementation that you are. So as you can see, for the self-hosted implementations, you may need a developer and a skin designer, systems administrator, and a database administrator. And in fact, I've seen some Sakai implementations where one person fills all 4 of these roles. So again, you don't have to hire a whole bunch of people. You can have a single individual fill a lot of these roles. For those of you who are, and I know some of you are self-hosted out there on the webinar, if you are self-hosted, I do have some statistics in terms of how many of each type of role you need, depending on, and which can vary depending on the number of users that you have. And so I can certainly share that with you guys if I remember at the end of the webinar. You might also choose to identify a pilot group of people. So if you're not ready to release Sakai to your entire organization at this time, choose a small subgroup of that organization and see if they can do a pilot or a trial. That's also really helpful because they give you feedback about how Sakai is working and behaving, and then if you need to, you can make changes to better accommodate the folks you're going to be serving. I always recommend attending Sakai functional training, and if you are going to be self-hosted or commercially hosted, I recommend you attend Sakai Administration Workspace training. There's actually a functional training event that I'm going to be hosting starting in December. It's called Sakai Winter Boot Camp. It's all about how to create and manage a course in Sakai, and I don't have any dates for Sakai Administration Workspace training, but I'll probably release those in February for an Administration Workspace training that starts in March. If you're going to do a self-hosted implementation, I recommend either attending Sakai technical training or at least reading the Sakai technical guides online. And so I'm actually going to be sharing this spreadsheet with you guys at the end of the webinar, and there are links within the spreadsheet so that you can access the relevant documents that I'm talking about. So there are some technical training and technical guides available in the Sakai community, and you should certainly use those if you intend to implement Sakai on your own or do a self-hosted implementation. You'll need to decide how you're going to deal with backups and disaster recovery. So what happens if something bad happens to the piece of hardware that is hosting your Sakai implementation? How are you going to figure out how to recover from backup? What's your plan for that? How are you going to establish your hardware or your cloud hosting requirements? Those are actually requirements that are documented in the Sakai Confluence page, so if you need more information on that, I can certainly provide it. And then also, how are you going to establish your technical configuration requirements? Do you know what those are? I'm just going to jump into this lesson cloud instance for a second to show you just a quick example of some of the things that I'm talking about. And by the way, you don't have to memorize what I'm doing here. I'm going into the Sakai Administration Workspace to just show you some configurable options. And as you can see from this list, I have, at least in this particular realm, I've got 427 different switches that I can turn on and off or that I can set. So one example, this is just one of 427 property settings, is the setting that controls the size of file your users are going to be allowed to upload. And so in this particular Sakai implementation, the users in Lesson Cloud are allowed to upload up to 20 megabytes at a time. And I have recently discovered that this is not big enough, so I'm going to be changing that. But this is just generally the type of technical configuration that you're going to want to consider when you're doing your Sakai implementation. So does that mean you have to look at all 427 settings? Are they all really important? No, I don't think so, but there are some really important ones that you want to consider before you launch your implementation. So another type of decision-making process that you'll have to go through is establishing your functional configuration requirements. So this is just kind of a list. What I'm sharing on the screen right now is a list of the different types of functional configuration requirements. So who's going to be logging in and what should they be allowed to do? You're going to have students probably in your Sakai implementation, and when they log in, they should probably be allowed to go to their courses, but then you're also going to have some instructors, right? And so maybe they should be allowed to do different things when they log in. Maybe they should be allowed to create courses. And so, I mean, it's things like this that you want to talk about with your implementation team and decide on ahead of time. Otherwise, you could potentially have people logging in without the proper permissions and without the ability to do the things that they need to do. So we talk about things like user account permissions, what the users are going to see when they first log into Sakai, what their My Workspace is going to look like, which tools do you want to use? Do you want to hide certain tools? Have you decided that you just hate the feedback tool and Dropbox tool and you don't want to support it, you don't want to use it? You can hide tools if you want to. How are you going to deal with your roles and permissions? So here's just another example of some functional configuration. For every course site in Lesson Cloud, users can choose from 4 different roles. Now, there were only 3 different roles by default in Sakai, and I decided that there needed to be a facilitator role that was kind of underneath the course owner role. So I was, this is kind of a funny story, I was at the University of Florida a couple of years ago helping them with their Sakai implementation. And they had a group of, I think, nearly 30 people in the room going through the decision-making process that I was presenting to them. And they initially started with more than, I think, 20 potential roles for their Sakai implementation, and they finally whittled it down to about 13. But for any given course in the University of Florida implementation of Sakai, users can be one of up to 13 different roles. So that's something that you want to consider beforehand, because once you start creating courses, it's really hard to cause any changes that you make after you've created courses to occur in the existing courses. So my point is, it's a good idea to make sure that you create your roles and your functional settings and your configurations ahead of time or before you go live. So those are some examples of some functional configuration requirements. And there's more. When I do Sakai implementation events, we usually go through about a day and a half to 2 days of decision making on the functional and technical configuration requirements. The next, if you are self-hosting, and this does not apply to commercially hosted or Lesson Cloud hosted implementations, but if you are self-hosting, you'll need to establish any custom code requirements and figure out how you're going to handle version control for that. You'll also quite obviously need a developer who knows Java in order to create that custom code. You'll also need to establish authentication and authorization requirements. Here's what I mean by that. If you have an implementation of Sakai, you have immediately 2 problems to solve. And the first problem to solve is, how are you going to get users into the system? So users need to be able to log into Sakai. How is that going to happen? Are you going to create local IDs in Sakai? Are you going to integrate Sakai with LDAP or Active Directory or some other type of student directory? Do you have, if you're a higher ed institution, are you using CAS or Shibboleth for users getting logged in? Are you going to Shibboleth Sakai or CASify Sakai? All sorts of different options for getting users into the system. If you're a Lesson Cloud implementation, that decision has already been made for you. Users just log in with their email address and a password, and everyone gets a local ID, and you don't have to worry or care about things like LDAP or CAS or Shibboleth, and you don't have to remember anything about what I just said for the last 2 minutes or so. So that's one problem you have to solve, getting users into the system. There's another problem to solve, which is actually getting users enrolled into their courses with the correct roles. So for larger Sakai implementations, that is not something that you can handle manually. For those of you who are doing a Lesson Cloud implementation, or if you're hosting your courses in Lesson Cloud, it's pretty easy to just copy and paste a list of, say 50 users or so into your Sakai course and have that be that in terms of getting users into the course. But if you've got thousands upon thousands of users, you're going to want to find a way to make sure those users get created, as well as access to the correct courses with the correct roles. So you need to know who's teaching the courses, who's taking the courses, make sure they get created into the courses with the correct roles. So big decisions in terms of authentication and authorization requirements. And then if you are going to be integrating Sakai with some other external systems, then you're going to want to establish those integration requirements as well. I've seen Sakai integrate with a system like Illuminate, or I'm trying to think of another one, Big Blue Button. Those are synchronous web meeting systems. And so if you're going to integrate Sakai with something like that, you'll want to make sure you set up the requirements, or at least establish a plan for those integrations. And then there's the skin and branding. So what are you going to call Sakai, and what color is it going to be when users go to the home page, and what logo are you going to have at the top of the screen? Sometimes this is a decision made by a single individual, and sometimes there's an entire marketing team that has a whole lot to say about this type of decision. Establishing a plan for user support and user training is sometimes important. I have noticed that for the smaller scale Sakai implementations, specifically the ones that are using Lesson Cloud, the instructors tend to do a lot of their own support first, but if people need more support than the instructors are able to provide, who are they going to call? There should be a plan for that. You should also establish a plan for user training, and by user training, I really just mean instructor or facilitator training. Typically, students, at least when you have set up your course in a way that makes it easy for the students to interact with, students just typically figure it out and don't need a lot of training. It's the instructors and the instructional designers who need more training, because they need to know how to create content, run the course, deal with grades and assessment, and so forth. So once you have made some decisions and you've kind of established some plans regarding some of the things we just talked about, consider building your implementation timeline. So I have seen Sakai implementations take 4 weeks from initiation to go live. I've seen Sakai implementations that actually have a pilot process first before they actually go live take greater than 6 months to a year, especially if you're going to be doing a migration plan or migrating from some other learning management system into Sakai. That typically takes a little bit longer. So you'll build your implementation timeline, and then the last thing you'll want to do if you are a self-hosted implementation is make sure you configure your hardware, or at least figure out what you're going to do in terms of setting up Sakai in the cloud. And under the notes, we've got just some items listed here that are potentially part of the Sakai stack. So as I said before, I'll share this document with everyone who's on the webinar today, and you can go through that at your leisure. So that's actually that first phase where you're doing a lot of the planning and the documenting and decision making. For at least the self-hosted implementations and the commercially hosted implementations, that could take you longer than any of these other phases, just making a bunch of decisions about how things are going to work. If you're a Lesson Cloud hosted implementation, this initial phase doesn't actually take you long at all. You are going to be spending the most time actually going through training, if you decide to do training, as well as building and testing your courses. So for phase 2 then, and this phase I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but I am going to share with you all of the things that are involved with it, is about actually doing work, technical work mostly, installing Sakai, configuring Sakai, implementing all of the decisions that you made during that first phase of the project, and integrating Sakai with whatever it is you're going to integrate Sakai with, some system for authentication, student information system like Banner or PeopleSoft, and applying all those configurations, as I said before, both functional and technical. So you might consider installing a dev instance or a test instance. This is especially important if you are going to be implementing custom code into Sakai. So that's certainly optional. You don't have to, but it's something you should consider. And then you want to install your Sakai instance, of course. So for self-hosted implementations, you'll be doing that on your own, either on your own hardware or in the cloud. For commercially hosted implementations, the Sakai installation is typically a task that's performed by whatever commercial entity is hosting your Sakai implementation. You won't actually have to do the install work. You can choose to build and test and release your Sakai skin. So that's going to require somebody with HTML and CSS skills. I put a tick in the box for the commercially hosted implementations because I've seen some institutions implementing Sakai who actually do perform this task on their own. Others will have the commercial hosting company do all of the skin work. So that could, you may or may not have to complete this task if you're commercially hosted. If you have created any custom code, or if you're planning on creating custom code, you're going to build and release and test. And this is actually kind of an iterative process, because usually the first time you write some code, it's not 100% perfect, so you have to keep going back and fixing it. But those of you who are familiar with development probably know that already. So I won't spend too much time on that, other than to say Sakai is something that requires Java programming skills. That's not JavaScript, that's Java. So you'll perform the Sakai technical configuration. The person who actually performs both the technical and functional configuration, these might be two different people, should always test their work once they have completed it. So for technical configuration, that means creating property settings, adding property settings, removing property settings, restarting your application server a couple times, just to make sure that it, and then testing just to make sure that it works. And then for functional configurations, you're going to be using the administration workspace a lot. You'll use the sites tool to create templates for the user workspaces, and you'll use the realms tool to create templates for user account types and roles within courses and permissions. You may use, if you are using the what was formerly known as RSmart, or it's now called the AsahiNet version of Sakai. There are many versions out there. The Lesson Cloud implementation happens to use the AsahiNet version, so that's the one I'm most familiar with. You may end up using a tool called the Customizer, and you're also going to be building templates. So then you have to complete those integrations that you decided to do, getting users logged into the system, getting users access to their courses. If that type of activity is going to come from some other system, you'll want to set up that integration, make sure you test it. And then you'll also want to complete any other external integrations. So are you integrating Sakai with a portal? Are you integrating Sakai with some other systems that are LTI producers? Make sure you get that working and make sure that you test it. So I'm going to stop for just a second and see if I can check in the question queue. Let me exit full screen real quick so I can get back to my question queue. Here we go. Someone's asked, is the presentation is going to be recorded for later viewing? Yes, in fact, I am recording. I often forget to record, but today I put a big note on my computer that reminded me to do it. So yes, we are in fact recording. All right, let's take another look at the phases here. So we're on phase 3, testing and fixing. And by fixing, I don't mean fixing bugs necessarily. I just mean changing configuration to suit your needs in a better way. And this is an iterative process. So this could go on from the start of your Sakai project plan all the way through supporting and maintaining Sakai. You're going to be constantly testing and fixing things. So I said before that as you perform these implementation tasks in phase 2, you should be testing your work as you go. But what you're also going to need to do is get other folks who are not you to perform tests on Sakai. So even if this is something just as trivial as make sure that the student can log in and see the course that they're enrolled in, it's certainly a good idea to just have somebody do a quick check to make sure that users are able to do the things that you want them to be able to do. And of course, as the test results come in, you'll get feedback and you'll be able to make implementation and configuration changes based on that feedback. So like I said, phase 3 is not just something that happens all on its own. It happens throughout all of the phases that I'm sharing with you today. And then phase 4 is where those of you who are hosting in Lesson Cloud will no longer be bored with this presentation, because here's where you get to do quite a bit of work. So we get to talk about figuring out how to support users, how to design your courses, how to communicate that information to your users, and if you are doing a migration, whether it's a migration from some other LMS to Sakai or whether it's a migration from Classroom to Sakai. Maybe you haven't used an LMS before and you're taking a course that was previously taught in person and moving it into an online format. Either way, that's considered a migration, so that is something that you may have to do as well. So I recommend if you're going to have more than, say, 10 users in any given course, you should have some type of user support plan. If you're a large institution, that might be, or that might mean, hiring an external support provider to provide that tier 1 support for your users. If you're a smaller institution, it might be one person who's only available Monday through Thursday from 10 to 3. So that depends on you, but users should have somebody to email or call if they have a problem. And like I said before, a lot of times that's the instructor of the course. So the instructor is typically the first line of support for the students. But then if a student can't get their issue resolved, there needs to be an escalation path. So maybe that issue gets escalated to an instructional designer or whoever created the course, or a tech support person or something like that. Consider having a training plan. So if you are, just a very small Sakai implementation and you're only going to have 1 or 2 courses, you might not need much of a training plan. You might need to get yourself trained, but you don't necessarily have a whole bunch of instructors who need training. So in that case, maybe you're already done creating your training plan. But there needs to be a way for all Sakai implementations to train the people who are actually going to be using the system for content creation, teaching and learning, collaboration, and assessment. So as I said before, of course, Brutus Partners offers that type of training, and we also offer administrator training. So that's certainly something you could consider. Or if you have, some key folks who go through kind of the generic Brutus Partners training, you can then kind of, as you learn Sakai and you use Sakai a little bit more, create your own training plan, and then you can train your own constituents and your own staff. So you don't have to send everybody to generic training. Once you learn Sakai, you can start training your own folks. You should consider establishing some migration requirements. Migrating from another LMS migrating from one LMS to another is never a super easy push button process. So what you have to decide is, first, what process are you going to use to migrate your course content from one system to the next, or from your classroom into an online format, and also what components of that course are important enough to migrate, and what components of that course are not as important or too hard to migrate into Sakai that you may want to consider abandoning. If you have more questions about migration, please feel free to email me directly. I will share with you that migrating from any other system into Sakai or into from one LMS into another is definitely not my favorite thing to do, but it is something that I can help with if you need some help. So I can't stress enough how important it is to get folks trained on Sakai. I do have a little bit of a story about a school that I was working with a couple of years ago, and I'm not going to share with you the name of that school because they probably wouldn't want me to, but they actually did a migration from a learning management system called Blackboard to a learning management system called eCollege, which I'm not sure is actually available any longer. But at any rate, what happened was the school did not give anybody any training on eCollege, and the school paid some folks to migrate all of the Blackboard courses into eCollege. So what happened was, these instructors who had never been through eCollege training, who had only been using Blackboard for their courses, logged into Sakai a week before classes started and they went to their, or not Sakai, they logged into eCollege before their classes started, went to their courses, and they said, what in the heck is this? And they were so upset about the way that the new system had been implemented in terms of, well, I guess I would call it lack of communication and lack of training, that they ended up dumping eCollege just a couple of years later because the instructors never really got over how that system was implemented and communicated to the people who were going to be using it. And so that worked out really well for the company that I was working for at the time that was a Sakai commercial host, because we got to come in and implement Sakai. And at that time, we involved everybody in the training, and we involved everybody, and by everybody I mean a select group of instructors, in the decision-making process and the requirements gathering, and they felt a lot better about that, and they're still using Sakai today, in fact. Your staff should go, at least one person from your staff should attend Sakai Administration Workspace training. There are not too many documents out there in terms of a Sakai Administration Workspace guide. I know AsahiNet has a really good one, so if you are an AsahiNet client, they do have a great guide, the Sakai Admin Guide, but it is really hard to get through some of those functions in the Sakai Administration Workspace without training. Like, for example, did you know that the tool that you use to actually create templates for user permissions is called the Realms tool? I mean, that's not all that intuitive, and so you find that it's true in for most administration workspace tools. Not all the tools are very intuitive, and so they don't always do what you think they might, except for the super user tool. That's a really helpful tool that lets you log in as another user, and it's pretty awesome. But in terms of getting Sakai configured, I can't recommend strongly enough that you attend Sakai Administration Workspace training when you're ready. And then also consider, if you have staff turnover, if you have another individual who's going to be in charge of your Sakai Administration Workspace, consider sending them to training as well. And then lastly, oh, I do not know why I didn't put an X in this box for Lesson Cloud. That's bad. Sorry about that, guys. I'm in the view-only mode of this presentation, but there is definitely supposed to be an X in the Lesson Cloud column for line number 57, instructional design. So this, for those who are hosting with Lesson Cloud, is going to be the core component of your work. You're going to be building your course, and then once you build your course, you're going to test your course, make sure that the things work that are supposed to be working, and then you're going to release the course to your students, either by publishing the course or by, when you're ready, adding the students or enrolling the students into your course. So for the larger Sakai implementations, I have no idea how long this might take. I think it just really depends on how many courses you're going to have. And then lastly, phase 5 is releasing Sakai and maintaining Sakai. So it is always fun to announce a go live date. And that is really just a day and time where you create an announcement to your constituents that says, congratulations to us, we are now live on Sakai, or live on Bridges, or live on C-Tools, or live on Tracks, or live on Lesson Cloud, or whatever the heck you want to call your implementation of Sakai. So you can announce your go live and announce your course availability. You're going to want to make sure you figure out a way to give users access. So maybe you send them an email blast and there's a link to your Sakai homepage, or maybe you send the users to your organization's homepage and there's a link to the Sakai implementation homepage. There's got to be some way for users to know where to go if they're going to be accessing Sakai. And they should also, of course, know what user ID and password they should use to log in. Like I think I said this already, having a plan for admin training, and this is pretty important. And I learned this when I was working for one of the Sakai commercial hosting providers, that every time there was a new Sakai administrator, our Tier 3 support desk just got flooded with requests. And most of those requests were requests that were kind of training issues, right? it wasn't that there were bugs, it was just that the new Sakai administrator wanted to know how to do something and they didn't know how to do it, so they were using our support desk as a training tool, and that tended to be pretty frustrating for them because they kept having to send us a ticket and then they'd have to wait for us to respond, and then sometimes they didn't understand. And I really felt like you know, if those folks had the opportunity to go through Sakai administrator training up front, then they would have been a lot happier because they wouldn't have had to continue to ask the support desk for help for the things that they wanted to do. If you are going to be upgrading and you are a self-hosted implementation, you should have a plan to manage and implement that upgrade. Anytime a new version comes out, you may decide to upgrade. Lesson Cloud usually waits a few months behind the Sakai community in terms of upgrades. I like to let all the other institutions figure out where all the bugs are, and then by the time those bugs are fixed, the next point release is out, and then I can upgrade to a more stable version. So I recommend doing that as well. The commercially hosted implementations typically have their commercial host perform the upgrades, so there's less work for you to do, but it is important to kind of know and understand, at least from a Sakai administrator's perspective, what all of the new tools and features are, and make sure you get your support teams trained on that. Then also, if you did have a test instance or a dev instance, you can choose whether to keep or discard it. I know that, you know, anytime you have additional Sakai instances floating around, it's costing somebody money, so you could certainly choose to keep or discard those. And then also just make sure you have a plan for backing up your Sakai instance, and you have a plan for recovering if a disaster should happen. And lastly, this is a really good idea for those of you who are self-hosted, to figure out some way of performing uptime monitoring. I did a Sakai implementation in Ohio where they had some, I forget which software system they were using, but they had some software that automatically logged into Sakai every 5 minutes and then logged right back out. And so failed, it would try again after a minute, and if it still failed, then like beepers would go off and people would get notified so that they could figure out what was going on. Typically the commercial hosts will perform their own uptime monitoring. Lesson Cloud does that as well, so if you are commercially hosted or Lesson Cloud hosted, you probably won't have to deal with uptime monitoring. And so I know it's kind of an exhaustive list of things to do, especially for those of you who are self-hosted. A little less things to do for commercially hosted, and certainly those of you who are hosting with Lesson Cloud have sort of a much lighter load. But you know, the option that you choose really depends on your needs. I mean, if you are going to be serving thousands and thousands of students, that could get pretty expensive getting commercially or being commercially hosted. So you might choose to be self-hosted. However, keep in mind that you're going to have actual people. You're going to have to pay people to support your self-hosted implementation. So I think weighing the benefits and drawbacks between these two options for those larger implementations is something that you may want to do in that first phase, or before that first phase, before you even decide to write your implementation checklist. Decide whether you want to do self-hosted or commercially hosted. And then, of course, if you are a larger implementation, you have more than, say, 3 or 5 or 10 courses, then you don't want to use Lesson Cloud because Lesson Cloud isn't really equipped to handle huge numbers of users. Of course, you know, as we gather more clients into our public instance, we can certainly expand our resources, and we have, but you know, we're not equipped to deal with larger Sakai implementations and larger needs that larger organizations have. So really, I think what you intend to do with Sakai is going to help guide your decision in terms of how you want to manage the hosting. I'm going to toggle back over to my presentation here and make sure that I am not forgetting anything, and it doesn't look like I am. So let me close out of here, and I'm going to check the question queue and see if there are some more questions. There's a question about how to maintain previous academic terms data. I think what you might be asking about is what happens when a course is over, and that's entirely up to you. So when you are teaching a course and the term is over and you're no longer teaching the course, you could certainly delete the course if you don't want to have it available in Sakai anymore. However, deleting a course will actually delete all of the records that were associated with that course. A better idea might be to unpublish the course, which would disallow the students from accessing that course anymore. So the students won't see the course, but the instructor or the instructional designer who owns that course will still be able to see it. Typically, I mean, nothing gets deleted automatically in Sakai. So once a term ends, your courses from that term are still going to be in Sakai until you actively choose to do something about that. I've got another question. What version of Sakai does Lesson Cloud use? Currently, Lesson Cloud is on Sakai version 2.9.5. That is kind of a hybrid between Sakai 2.9 and Sakai 10. Like I said before, I host Lesson Cloud with SahiNet, and so they typically lag behind the community a little bit in terms of their releases because they like to do what I do, wait until all the problems are discovered and get those fixed before releasing Sakai to the users. So Lesson Cloud is on 2.9.5. I expect to upgrade that probably a month or two after SahiNet releases their Sakai 10 release. So maybe February or March will be the time for Sakai 10. I see a couple other questions. I'm going to just hold off on the questions for just a second because I wanted to just finish up with the presentation. There are some upcoming Sakai-related events that I wanted to share with you, and one of those events is the Sakai Virtual Conference. That is something that is organized by the Sakai community and facilitated by the Sakai community. So that is going to be on November 7th, and it's a full-day virtual conference. There is also going to be a Sakai Winter Boot Camp that starts on December 15th and ends on January 16th. It's kind of an intensive course in terms of knowledge gained, but I wouldn't say that it is hard. But there's a lot to it. So I know that is winter break for some of you, and I've gotten mixed reactions from folks about having this winter boot camp during winter break. For those of you who are in higher ed, this might be around finals time or whatever, but it's going to be a mix of instructional webinars, kind of like we're doing right now, where I'll demonstrate how to do something or show you about a new tool, and then you'll be given assignments in the form of hands-on exercises. So you'll actually, once I'm done doing the instructional part, you'll have a couple of days to complete a bunch of exercises, which will then be graded. It's going to be loads of fun, and once the boot camp is over, you'll be able to earn a certificate. We are going to accept late assignments because I know schedules are crazy during the holidays, and we are not going to have any instructional events during that week of Christmas, during Christmas week. So we'll have instructional events before Christmas week and instructional events after, but not during. And of course, I am going to be, as I said before, in a couple of months adding an administrator training option at brutuspartners.com, so feel free to check back there whenever you're ready. I'm going to come back to the question queue. Okay, I've got, here's, I'll just go from the bottom up because we just got a new one. Can we use Asahi code without any authorization? Because Asahi code is available in Sakai SVN. Yeah, actually, you can use Asahi's code because their distribution is open source as well. So you don't have to sign up for an agreement with AsahiNet in order to use their code. You are welcome to use that. Can you recommend a commercial host? Of course I can. I hesitate to recommend a single commercial host on this webinar only because all of the commercial hosts do a great job, but they each have their own individual characteristics and service that they provide. And so choosing one is something that you should do pretty carefully just because each of them has their own strengths. So if you do want me to recommend a commercial host for you, I need to find out more about what you're looking for. So please feel free to contact me. My contact information is available in this presentation that I'll be sending out to everybody, so you'll be able to send me an email about that. Here's another question. Are there instructions on skinning Sakai? Yes, there are some instructions on skinning Sakai available in the Sakai community. I don't actually have the URL available on my computer right now, but if you send me an email, the person who asked that, just send me an email and I can send you a link to the instructions on how to skin Sakai. There would be two sets of instructions. There are instructions for the XSL portal, and there are instructions for the Neo portal. I recommend using the Neo portal, by the way. Last question, does Sakai have web conferencing? Sakai itself does not come with any specific web conferencing tool. However, there are various web conferencing tools that exist, and in order to use those web conferencing tools in Sakai, they either need to be integrated with Sakai through some custom code, and some custom code is available in the Sakai community for certain web meeting integrations, or those systems need to be an LTI producer and integrate with Sakai via LTI. And I know that Big Blue Button integrates with Sakai via LTI. But then also, if you just have, if you're going to be teaching Sakai in Lesson Cloud and you have like a GoToMeeting room or an Adobe room that has a static URL, you can just use the Sakai Web Content tool to link your users right into your virtual classroom that way. Couple other questions. Can you please tell me your email? Sure. You know what I'll do is I will type my email into the chat, and then everybody will have it. Okay, so you'll see a chat section in the GoToWebinar control panel, and so if you just check that chat section, you'll see my email address. Last question is, will the recorded copy of this webinar be available for later, and if so, where? Yes, I am going to make this available. The public trainings I usually put up on YouTube. The private trainings I put up on Vimeo, but this is a public training, so it'll be on YouTube. And what I'll do is I'll send a follow-up email to everyone who attended and or registered for this webinar today, and I'll send you two things. I'll send you a link to the recorded version of this webinar, and I'm also going to send you a copy of the presentation that has all the links in it. So there's the link to the boot camp, there's the link to the implementation checklist, and so forth. So, and there's another question. When did the webinar start? I just joined. It started an hour ago, but don't worry. We are recording the webinar, and so if you missed it, I am going to send a link to everybody who signed up for the webinar, so you'll be able to see it. So I'm sorry you just joined. As what happens sometimes when you're doing a webinar and folks are attending from all over the place, inevitably time zones get mixed up and these things happen, so I'm sorry you missed that. So we're a little bit over time. I only wanted to go an hour. We're 4 minutes past the hour, so I think I am going to let everybody go. And of course, if you have any additional questions, you should feel free to contact me at the email address that you now see on your screen. I forgot that I had the contact slide in my presentation, or you can just copy and paste my email from the chat area, which is where I posted it earlier. So I wanted to thank everybody for coming and for all of the really good questions, and I wish you a lot of luck with your Sakai implementations. Want to remind everybody, if you want to attend some Sakai training, please feel free to check the brutuspartners.com website. We're going to be posting upcoming trainings as they become available. And good luck to you all on your Sakai implementation, however you decide to do it. I hope it works well for you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And with that, I think we're just about done. So have a great afternoon or rest of the night for those of you who are attending and it's the middle of the night for you. I hope you enjoy the sleep you're about to get. So take care, everybody, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.